Let's look at ways to store and manipulate multiple values of the same type. The most common way to do this in Java is with an array. An array is a data structure that allows you to store a sequence of values all of the same type. You can have arrays for any primitive type like ints, doubles, booleans, or in fact any of the 8 primitives we've learned about. You can also have arrays for any class. Elements in an array are indexed starting at 0. If we have an array storing 5 names conceptually, it looks as shown here. The first element is at index 0 and is Andy. The last element in this array is at index 4 and has the string value Eve. When you declare an array, you first specify the type of the elements you want in the array. Then you include square brackets in the declaration, which is the key for Java to identify the variable as an array. The square brackets can follow the type as shown in the first 2 examples. You can also put the square brackets after the variable name as shown in the last example. The first approach is much more common. This is the format I'll be using to declare arrays in code in this course. Note that you don't specify a size in the array declaration itself. One way to instantiate the array is with the new keyword, similar to what we've seen when creating instances of classes. Looking at the left-hand side of this slide, we have an array declaration on the left of the equal sign and then an array creation expression on the right side. On the right-hand side of the slide, I'm showing a typical class object creation statement. They look pretty similar, but there are 2 major differences when creating arrays. Square brackets are required when using the new keyword, and a size is specified between them. So in this example, there will be 10 elements in the array. An array instantiation doesn't have a set of parentheses, meaning we can't pass data to a constructor for an array. Using parentheses with an array instantiation gives you a compiler error. Okay, that's a brief overview of what an array is. Let's look at arrays in some code now. I've already created a project called Arrays Project with the usual main class and main method. And I've put this class in the dev.lpa package, which I'll be doing from now on. My class has this first statement, the package statement. Int, left and right square brackets, my int array equals new int with 10 in square brackets. Okay, let's type some code. I'll start with the type and then square brackets followed by the variable name. Then we use the new keyword. Underneath the covers, a Java array is just a specialized class, which is why the new keyword is used. After the new keyword, the type needs to be specified again, similar to how we do it for a class when creating a new instance. But this time, we specify the array size in square brackets. The array size means the maximum number of elements that can be placed into the array. In this case, the elements are ints. It's important to know that an array is not resizable. The size of an array once created is fixed. In this case, integer array will have 10 elements. You can't change the size of an array after the array is instantiated. You can't add or delete elements. You can only assign values to one of the 10 elements in this array in this example. Note that Java has other capabilities to store elements that can be resized. We'll be looking at those in the next section. For now, it's important to understand these basic arrays. Let's see how we'd go about accessing array elements. My int array with 5 in square brackets equals 50. You might assume that this code is assigning 50 to element 5, but it's actually saving it to element 6. The reason for this is that, as with all arrays in Java, indexing starts with position 0, not 1, as stated on the slides. Instead of starting from 1 and finishing on 10, for this array, you start from 0 and finish on 9. This may be confusing at first, but you'll soon get used to it. As I mentioned, arrays can be any primitive type, so I could create an array containing doubles. I will do that next. Double square brackets, my double array equals new double, and I'll set it to 10 elements. And I'll set the third element of my double array to the value 3.5. And here, I'm creating an array called my double array with space for 10 doubles, and I set the third element in that array to a floating point number, a decimal number 3.5. Remember, any decimal number literal, like I'm using here, is really a double in Java. Retrieving a value from the array is done in the same way, using the position of the element in the array. I'll print out the third element of the double array I just created, print in my double array with 2 in square brackets to specify the third element. Again, I call it the third element, but I use index 2 because Java starts counting at 0 for arrays. and I get 3.5 printed out, which I assign to that element on line 11. Like any variable, whatever type I define the variable to be, that's the type of data that can be assigned to that array. You can't put a double into an integer array in much the same way you can't assign a double value to an integer variable. I'll assign some more data to the first two elements of the integer array. I'll try to set the first element of my int array to the double value 45.0, and I'll try to set the second element to the string literal 1. In this code, I've purposely created a couple of errors. I declared this array to store integers, but to show you what happens, I'm trying to assign other types of values to the array elements. You can see I have compiler errors here because Java doesn't allow this. In the first case, I have a double, and that can't be assigned to an int element. In the second case, I'm trying to assign a string literal to an int variable, which is what each array element really is. Both don't work, so I'll fix those. And that compiles, so that's good. But imagine assigning values this way, one at a time like this, for the other 7 elements. That would likely get tedious quickly. Java provides another shortcut for creating an array that also initializes the values. If you know the values for all the elements at the time you create the array, we can use an array initializer. An array initializer makes the job of instantiating and initializing an array much easier. In this example, you can see I still use the new keyword and have int with the square brackets. But here I specify the values I want the array to be initialized to in a comma delimited list within curly braces. Because these values are specified, the length of the array can be determined by Java, so I don't then need to specify the size of the array in square brackets. And actually Java provides an even simpler way to do this. Java allows us to drop the new int with brackets from the expression as I'm showing here. This is known as an anonymous array. Here, I'm showing examples for both an int array as well as a string array. An anonymous array initializer can only be used in a declaration statement. I'll explain what that means in a minute. Okay, so getting back to my code, I'll create a new integer array. This time, I'll use an array initializer to create an array with the values 1 through 10 in it. Int, square brackets first 10 equals, and in curly braces, I'll type the numbers 1 through 10. I'll print the first element of the newly created array. I'll save the length of the array using first 10 dot length and print that out. Okay, so now I've created a new integer array, and I've actually defined the numbers I want in that array, the numbers 1 through 10. Java looked at that and initialized our integer array with 10 elements. Then Java assigned each value in this list to an array element in the order I specify here. Element 0 gets assigned the value 1, and element 9 of the array will get the value 10. To confirm that, I'm printing out the first element in this code, and then I access a field on the array called length that tells me the length of the array. Here I assign it to a local variable called array length, and am then printing it out. If I run this code, we get first equals 1 and length of array equals 10. What happens if I want to get the last element of an array? I'll add another line of code to get the last element using the length of the array. I'll attempt to use first 10 with array length in square brackets to achieve that, but if I run this though, I get an exception. This is an array index out of bounds exception, and you can see the message index 10 out of bounds for length 10. This is a very common error to make. It's very normal to think that counting starts at 1, but Java starts indexing with 0. Because it starts with 0, all indices are shifted by 1. The last element in an array that has 10 elements is at index 9. I need to subtract 1 from the length to get the last index. I will fix that. I hope you noticed that a variable, and by extension, an expression can be used in the square brackets to access an array element, as I was showing here. The expression or variable needs to evaluate to an integer value. I'll run this. I get last equals 10. I've said this array initializer can only be used in declaration assignments or method arguments, so I'll review what that means here. Int square brackets new array, and I'll attempt to set the values 1 to 5 reversed as an array initializer on a separate line. And now with this code, I've got a compiler error. If I hover my mouse over that statement, I see that array initializer is not allowed here. This means we can't use the anonymous version of the array initializer in a statement outside of a declaration statement. But I can use the longer form, so I'll change that now, including new int with square brackets before the values in curly braces. And this code compiles. Right, moving on. Once you have an array, you can loop through the elements, retrieving each value with the loop index. I can do this with the traditional for loop. My for loop will start with int I equals 0, then I less than new array.length, and finish with the relatively standard I++. I'll then print element I of new array with a space following it. What I'm doing there is looping through each element starting from element 0. I start with I equals 0, I then increment by 1 while I is less than new array.length, and I print out each element using the loop index to get the current element. I'm just printing all of those on a single line with a space between each. And running that, you can see all the elements in the array got printed. Okay, that's my introduction to the basic array, declaring an array, and the different ways to instantiate an array. In the next video, we continue working with the array type,